Well, thank you first and foremost for allowing me to tell my story. Um, my first name, well, I'll just say my name in Dutch. I'm half Dutch, half Indonesian. My first name is Gerard. My middle name is Johannes van de Werken. Gerard Johannes van de Werken. And there's an art to that name. We'll get to that when I come to America. Well, anyway, I was born in Jakarta, Indonesia, in many, many years ago. My father is a Dutchman. My mother is Indonesian. Blessed with her color of her skin. I can go out in the sun and not be, like most of you in this room, have issues. So even though my lovely wife is back there, Annette, she tells me, put sunscreen on. Nah, I'm okay. But yes, anyway, Indonesia was a Dutch colony. My father's mother died at age 12, and he had a contentious relationship with his father and his younger brother. The father favored the younger brother, so he left early. So soon he could get into the army, and he was, I believe, a master sergeant in the Dutch army. And that's around a little after World War II, 44, 45, when he was shipped to Indonesia. On my mother's side, she is the only child. Her father, which my mother to this day was hoping I would not turn into, which she's glad I didn't, but he was kind of playboyish, drove fast cars, and he had a coffee plantation. He had two coffee plantations. What I mean by two is the first one he lost through the Great Depression, and he rebuilt it. And my mom used to say that there used to be 500 people picking coffee on the plantation, and he lost that one through World War II. Unbeknownst to me, my mom and my dad never spoke of this to me until, my mom was probably in her late 60s when, unbeknown to us, to the family, to all my siblings, when Indonesia was invaded by the Japanese, she was put in a concentration camp with just about everybody else. And she was separated from her parents, and adopted parents took her in and sort of shepherded her. And so anyway, long story short, after World War II, I was born and basically lived a good life. My father started from nothing. My father's a very brilliant man, self-taught, spoke 5 languages. He spoke my mom's language, learning from a Dutch dictionary and the Indonesian paper. And my mom used to say he spoke it better than she did. A little about the history of Indonesia. It's about between 17 and 18,000 islands. 5 major islands. There are over 300 dialects of languages on those islands. And it's a very Muslim country. They're the 5th most populated country in the world. I want to say there was 160 million Muslims in that country. It's very Muslim, Southeast, which most people don't realize. And anyway, my father rose through the ranks meaning he went through electrical and collected enough. I was a young child. I went to Holland on a ship, go through the Suez Canal, came back through the Suez Canal, and then got another job on the second tour over there. I used to say I lived on the equator. The town name was Padang. If you look in the world map, you see the line Padang's just slightly above it. So, what's a line? But so I said I lived on the equator. My father at that time was running a hydroelectric power plant for a Dutch village. It was actually a Dutch company village. Was making, blowing up limestone along the cliffs, mountains of the place that we were living and making cement, basically. And they would use conveyor belts and stuff to bring it into the factory. But my father was responsible for the hydroelectric power plant, and we lived in the jungle. Or I say we lived in the jungle. We didn't actually live in the jungle, but we lived there's in a village, and we're the only folks other than the villagers there. And you walk halfway up. We lived halfway up the mountain, and the other half you were in the jungle. And unbeknownst to my mom, Dad had to inspect the dam, which is about 2.5, 3 miles into the jungle. And we walked through an aqueduct, on the aqueduct wall. My dad always warned, if you're going to fall in the aqueduct. Because you looked over there, way down there. And anyway, you saw snakes. I was, truthfully, it was an ideal way of living there. I had a wonderful time. It was just me and my sister at that time. And wonderful stories. I still remember my father and mother would go out to the Dutch village, and the maid would babysit for us. And one day, I woke up and said, "Where's Mom and Dad?" Well, they couldn't get into the house because there was a lion in front of the door. So they slept near the factory down there until he decided to leave. Because basically, we lived in a house which had a big fence around it, a huge, tall fence, 12, 13 feet, something like that, for the animals not to come into the compound. And so anyway, my middle brother was born. His name is Abraham Christian Va De Werken. And about that time, about 6 weeks later, 7 weeks later, as I recall, and what's been told to me from my mom, all of a sudden I saw my mom, my dad, start packing suitcases. Oh, we're going on vacation. Not unusual. So they packed 5 suitcases, and that's all the allowance we were allowed to give. And we caravanned with another group of people from the Dutch village. And we were living now on the island named Java, where Padang is, and we had to get to the very tip of that island. And we had to hide during the day and travel at night. And my mom said there's about 35 people with kids, children, and there was a truck following with all our possessions. Before we left, my mom just ordered new furniture and just came in. So he left everything there, just the way it was. And with 5 suitcases, there was 5 of us at that time, we left in the caravan. At that time, what was happening was it's no different than it is today. People, the have and the have-nots and so forth, causes issues. And the Dutch finally were willing to give up the country, the colony back to the original people. Well, then you had factions of people fighting. The Muslims want to take power. The communists want to take power. The ethnic people want to take power. So there was a lot of infighting going on in that country. And so that's why we had to travel at night, because there was always skirmishes going on. I'm going to backtrack. Before we left, it was very important. As a young child, I was about 7, maybe almost 8, between 7 and 8. The chauffeur would take us from the jungle up to the main highway, me and my little sister, and would travel down to the school in town, which was a 2-classroom school, which spoke Dutch. The day, I still remember to this day, we drive up in the bus and I'm seeing this big tank. I mean, huge tank sitting there with soldiers on top of it. And I go, this is different coming to school. And there's a tank. Well, around 10-ish, around that time, all of a sudden you hear aircraft strafing, the schoolyards, everything. And so the teachers told us to dive under the desk, like the desk is going to really save us. But I heard my little sister crying. So I crawled over there to be with her. Well, anyway, it still affects me to this day. I thought I could get through this without doing this. But anyway, my dad sent a chauffeur to get us and brought us back. And then within 2 weeks, we were ordered to leave the country. And that's how we traveled at night. Traveled at night, hide at day in the jungle, anywhere we could hide, because there were too many factions. We got to this town way on the peninsula. Forgive me, I don't remember the town. It was a resort, actually. And we stayed there because we needed to get papers to get to Singapore. And there again, my brother was in the crib underneath the mango tree. And these were these cottages. And my dad and mom and I and my sister were sitting in the dining room watching the crib. And there's nothing going on at that time. All of a sudden, planes came again, were dropping bombs and strafing the schoolyards. Not school, the grounds and so forth. So anyway, of course, my mom screamed and my dad ran to pick up the baby. And about 4 or 5 days later, we were in these bungalows, and then all of a sudden, Army colonel of some sort came by, ordered all the people there to stand out in line to have their papers, to give them clearance to leave the country. Well, in the meantime, courteous boy as I am, I went into the back patio of this cottage we were staying in, and I climbed over, and here was a big truck, and there were nothing but dead bodies in it. So I saw death at a fairly early age. And so, and apparently there was a skirmish. I asked my dad, and he didn't want to discuss it. I was 7, 8 years old. Didn't want to discuss it with me. And he said, there was a fight going on over there. So anyway, it didn't really affect me that much, but that's when I first noticed the gruesome of war. Anyway, I didn't know this until we came to Holland many, many years. I was probably, in my 40s, 50s, when my dad never spoke about lots of things to me. My dad and I had a contentious relationship in a lot of ways. He was stubborn, I was stubborn. I want to learn English, be part of America. And my father's a good, stubborn Dutchman. So I learned a lot from my mom. My mom and I are very close. And so he says, when we lined up, the colonel was reading the papers and he misread something in her papers, because if he read it correctly, she was not allowed to be believed and probably be dead today. Oh, glad to know that. Yeah, that's why a lot of things were hidden from me. But through all the years, bits and pieces came. So we came to this resort, and after all this, the Red Cross finally had to come get us, and it was probably about a month and a half of waiting because the road was bombed up. There was only one road, and the Red Cross came up, and I still remember the big Red Cross flag flying on the trucks, and they segregate the men and the women. So my little brother, at that time, is probably about 2.5 months old, went with my mom, and so just me and my dad, and I could see the concern in my dad's face, worried about his wife and his other two children, my sister and my brother. And we got to the airport, got to the plane, we got to Singapore, and we flew from Singapore to Zurich, Switzerland. Life is very precious. I still remember to this day, we got off the plane because refuel and everything else. KLM airplane with 4 propellers on it. And got in there, warmed up, had something to eat, came back on the plane, told us to get off the plane. So we came off the plane. They put us back onto the plane. My dad gave me his heavy woolen coat. I don't know where he picked it up. He says, just wrap it around. They couldn't close the back door of the plane. Now, you folks are frying. Trust me, this is a true story. They literally, because there was no other planes going to get us, and they literally tied the back door shut. We took off. They didn't flew very high, but got real cold in that plane. So anyway, backstory. When we got to Singapore, we stayed in a hotel, and they kicked us out. They put it in the British, what do you call it, the Red Cross camp. There again, the men and women were separated. Everybody was de-liced. You got to go through this thing, and you got sprayed and get lice off you and all that stuff. So anyway, I still remember the very first Red Cross package. And so we stayed there for 2 or 3 months so my dad could get the papers ready before we went on the plane, went to Zurich, and went to Holland. Well, we were in Holland, and we stayed at my aunt's house. It was a farm, actually. And my dad was trying to keep this short here so you can ask me a bunch of questions. Basically, it was a decompression time for me and my sister. So I just ran all over the farm, did fishing, I went to school and so forth, and get our heads back together. And my dad was trying to find a job. You can see the influx of a lot of the Dutch Indos is what we were called, coming back to the Netherlands. And there was no jobs. And so my dad tried to get a job anywhere in the world, believe it or not. And so he wrote to Australia, South Africa, India, Saudi Arabia, a few other countries. It's been a long time ago. I was denied, me and my mom were denied entrance to South Africa and Australia because of the color of our skin. Now, to this day, how can they tell in a black and white picture? At that time, there was no color. Because all the documents I have, little I have, my parents, all I could see was black and white. So to get into America, you have to have a sponsor. And so my dad wrote, I don't know how he picked up, he never told me, and my mom don't remember when I asked her, but apparently there's a bulletin board, there's a newspaper, or there's some form of connections where people can find out how you can immigrate to America, and so you have to have a sponsor back there. Well, Ward family agreed to sponsor us. It's a family, you have to have a connection to sponsor us. And the Ward family had a connection with a church. It was a Baptist church, it was an American affiliation up in a town called Elgin, Illinois. Not Elgin, Elgin, Illinois. And so it took probably a year and a half. So my father was still living on the savings that he had collected when he was working in Indonesia. But this was about a 3-year period when I lived in Holland. And a lot of interesting stories, but just get to the immigration part. I remember my dad listening, teaching himself how to speak English on records, record player. I don't know what was going on. He wasn't saying anything to me or my sister and everything. And so all of a sudden, we were getting on a bus, got onto the boat, came to America on the boat. And one morning, matter of fact, I got deathly ill on the boat, which We came to America in the beginning of October, about 60 years ago. And we hit a tail end of a hurricane. And I got so seasick that I vomited enough that I got dehydrated and had to put in the sick bay. I thought the boat, I never know a motion that goes up and down, sideways, tilting up there. No, I mean, that went every direction but down. But anyway, finally we came through there. I think it was about 7, almost 8 days on the ocean. And there's one morning around 5:30, my dad woke me up and my sister, and he passed the Statue of Liberty. Dad was a very brilliant man, and he said, that's important. So anyway, we went through Ellis Island and processed through. I don't know what was going on. New country. You know, I just came from Indonesia, traveled through the Suez Canal. I flew to Switzerland and all that all my young life. I've traveled a lot, been to a lot of places. And we got to New York, you know, Ellis Island, New York, got into the train. I never found out how many people on that boat were actually were immigrants. I would say probably over 60%. And my dad came to America with $75 in his pocket, and we got on a train. To this day, there were 3 families. Unbelievable. Things that a child puts in their minds, and you know, and what gets ingrained in there gets kind of interesting. There was a family of 18 kids, also Indo, just like me and my dad, my mom. 18 kids, 2 sets of twins. Everybody was taking care of it, and mom and dad would just sit in the back of the side of the train, just sitting back there, and everybody was taking care of everybody. There were 2 other set of families, 13, and they all went to California. We went to Chicago. We got off the train, and we stood on the platform, and here's the back arch to it. My father was introduced, and here were the Ward family, and of course the people from the Baptist Church, and they were introducing names. And so it came to my father's, his name was Jacobus, so he became Jack. My mom was Christine, she was still Christine. Then it came to me, Gerard. Nobody heard. By the way, do you have a middle name? Johannes. You're good John. Good Baptist name. There's more to that story. And then my sister Maria, and then my brother Abraham Brown. So anyway, they settled us up into this apartment that they furnished, and my mom couldn't speak English, and so somebody in the church taught English and taught my mom how to speak for many years. And the unfortunate thing, I lost my Dutch language in this, and there was a reason for that. My brother at that time was about 2.5, 3 years old, and he wasn't speaking. And my mom was freaking out. And so my dad put an edict. Come home, we're all going to speak English so it could hear the English language. And so when we weren't speaking Dutch at home, you kind of lose it, right? And so we moved to Douglas, we immigrated to Elgin, Illinois, and Douglas Avenue, and that's how we started life in America. My dad eventually progressed, taught himself other skills, and I eventually migrated to Tucson, Arizona, and that's when I got my education. That time I went to Vietnam. Gosh, that's a long time ago too. That's 50 years ago for me. And so it's immigration, and that's how I came to America. Well, there's always going to be migrations of people into the world, and for different reasons, for different causes. And I can't say if it's good or bad. It's just people just going to migrate. I mean, this whole country was immigrations of people, even from the beginning of time. We immigrated to this country. And so I'm going to leave it up to questions. I can tell you a little more stories here and there, some funny ones, some sad ones. But anyway, yeah. But the one thing I have to say, I think Jonathan knows a little bit about this, was racism, say what it is, it's going to be there. When I moved in Douglas Avenue, the first thing the next door neighbor boy didn't like because of the slanted eyes until go back to China. He didn't even know where I came from, but we ended up fighting. It was in the military for me the same way. Every so often for my life, because the color of your skin does affect you. But you do the best you can. And but I was so grateful that when I was in high school, that I made a conscious. Well, there's two reasons I joined the Marines. First, they had to straighten me out because my dad he had enough of me, and I was pretty wild, not wild, but pretty wild out there, because I was trying to integrate, tried to belong. And so joined the military for the second reason. Well, the first reason, because they can't say I didn't pay a price to come here. Second, that's the only way I could afford college. So, GI Bill. So, the country is a great country, but we all come here for different reasons. And our story is my dad couldn't find a job, and he had to feed his family. And it wasn't for the Ward family and the church that gave us hands up, and wonderful people.
Is that their last name, or is that?
That's the unbeknownst to me for many, many years, the Wards sponsored us, was a husband and wife, and they were writers. They had 3 girls, I believe 3 girls. Over time, we lost contact with them. Actually, they divorced. It's unheard of back then. They ended up divorcing. The church is where I went to church camp, youth. It sort of grounded me, but actually the group that did me the most good was the Boy Scouts of America. America is strange in one way, humor. You would think humor is universal. It is not. And there's innuendos, so a lot of times 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, the boys were trying to teach me dirty jokes. Sometimes I go, that don't make sense. That sounds sort of funny, how my mind was running. And to this day, I have an issue sometimes. That don't sound funny to me. But anyway, they're the ones that taught me, and they gave me a lot of freedom. And but looking hindsight, it's almost been 60 years since I've been in this country, and there was quotas back then. How many people come in there? And every country is trying to protect their social structure because they can only help so many people. If you open up all the borders and everyone wants to come to America, I mean, there's a song about that, Well, us in this room, I'm kind of, because I'm Americanized, is that yes, we can help everybody, but at what cost? You know? And do we need to help when we can? Absolutely. That's part of the reason I do Habitat, I guess, because it's a hands up to give to people instead of just a hands out. So
Gerard, what do you remember about, I assume you all were naturalized, and
yes.
when did that
Oh,
happen? And what do
okay.
you remember about that?
Glad you asked, because in my brain here, when I came to America, they put me in, I was supposed to be in fifth grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. They put me one more grade back, and excuse me, because of the language. I remember this pretty young lady, Grace. Mrs. Nelson was my very first teacher. Very sweet fourth grade teacher. She put me in the back room. Remember those spelling books where you had to fill in and you had column of English words here. I had Dutch dictionary. I had to look it up what that word meant and then fill it in. And I'm trying to figure out English. She put me back there and integrated me as much as she could into the classroom. And but I had to go to the speech therapist. Why? Well, the Dutch have a tendency, it's guttural language. English is a little different, even though it comes from the same family tree. I had to learn the sound. So I'm constantly sticking my tongue out to this pretty lady. So I remember that. So anyway, when I went to high school, we moved in Elgin, Illinois, then we moved to Tucson. My dad, got a better job, and it's not good to. I asked my dad, please, don't split me up. Wait a couple more years until I'm out of high school. But right in my middle of my high school career, I moved to Tucson. And that's where the trouble started between me and my dad a lot more. And so we were butting heads all the time. But anyway, I decided to go into the military. There's a program, Vietnam was really starting to churn up with the draft notices. And I go, okay. I was not a brilliant A student type person. So I thought, well, I better join the Marine Corps. Why the Marine Corps? Don't ask. It's just, I wasn't listening to much of the rhetoric, the advertisement. I just chose the Marine Corps. And they had a 90-day program. So I was still in high school. April, I was in the Marine Corps officially. And I could pick a date when I wanted to enter service, but all that time was counting to my days of service in the service. So that's the reason I did it. Was not rocket science. Like, okay, that's less I got to serve. And so August 1st of 1968, I went into the service. But before that, my dad said, and here's the backstory. I'm glad you asked that, Kay, that I had two other siblings that were born in America. And Gerard, which my mom always called me, or Ger, was difficult for them. I went to grade school and high school by the name of John, or Johnny. My youngest sister to this day calls me Johnny. And the funny part about that was I had to stand in front of the judge. Of all the children my parents had, I was the only one that had to go in front of the judge. I had to swear allegiance to the United States. I had to answer questions. Who was the president of the United States? And a few other questions. And the reason my dad said, okay, you got to go in front of the judge. It's all set up and so forth. And and he said, it's probably a good time to change your name. What do you mean change my name? To your real name, he said. And what is that? And I said, Gerard. And so I went into the service, Gerard. When I came in the end of beginning of October 1959, I have never heard my name in English until a black TV show showed up called The Fugitive. And who was the lieutenant? Lieutenant Gerard. That's the first time I ever heard it in English. So I go by just about any name, even stupid. I had a foreman when I went to college. I worked in the summer in construction, gun nighting swimming pools and so forth. And they sometimes call me stupid, so I go by that too. Any other questions?
Do you have family that still lives in Indonesia?
No. In 1965, my father doing the best he can, raising 5 children, and my mom's mother, unbeknownst to my mom, passed away. She never got to see her mother again. My dad said, "You want to go? We'll take out a loan and send you back to Indonesia." She said, "No. What's the point?" So my sister, who's 2 years younger than me, passed away a number of years ago. Did the honors of taking my mom back 10, 15 years ago, which was a blessing.
Have you been back, Charles?
No.
Okay.
Like to, but the country is, regardless of what you say, it's not safe. I hate venturing even to Mexico. When I lived in Odessa, Texas, and guys said, "Let's go on a fishing trip." Guess what I brought with me? My naturalization paper, because I was so scared, because I was afraid, will it let me back in? So it's interesting. Now, I'm not as afraid about it tonight because I got a passport and everything, but it's still that ingrained thing is that fear. Once you're here, you more or less want to stay, because, and I would love to take a net to Indonesia, but it's not a safe place as what they say it is, because there's a lot of still friction going on. It's more democratic than it's been, but it's the 5th populated country. There's only so much land. There's only about 900 habitable islands out of the 17,000.
Where would you go back to? Because you traveled so much. Where would you visit?
My sister, who's passed away, is born in Bogor, and there was a time there was a Presbyterian church, and there was the house, the rectory. Nobody was living in, so we moved into that. I remember that. That's when I remember my first black dog, and I was out in the crib in the front yard. But next door to it was the presidential grounds, and my dad actually did the electrical work in that presidential when they were building it. So, my sister was Bogor. My brothers, Abraham was born in Padang, and I was born in Jakarta, Indonesia, which happens to be the capital. In the Dutch language, it's DJ. Today they took the D off, and now Jakarta. Yes, sir.
Gerard, do you ever experience a racist reaction or a reaction because you were originally an immigrant? Do you still encounter that today?
Yeah, it's when I traveled after 10 years of marriage, we finally decided, Ned and I decided finally to take a honeymoon. We went to Hawaii. They think I'm Hawaiian. This part of the world, they think I'm Mexican. And people have this perceived idea because of your color of your skin and the way you look or something, you belong, and they start speaking to you that way. And they get upset. Huh?
Those were benefits in that case.
Yeah.
Treated a lot better.
Yeah. Yes, in Hawaii was good, honestly. It's interesting, but I don't take a lot of stock to it. It is what it is, and you got to learn how to fit in and work around it. and get along. That's why part of the reason I enjoy Habitat is because we got some influx of many personalities, and I don't care who shows up, so long you're willing to work and help somebody. That's the important thing.
I can't imagine if anybody hears your story or the story of another immigrant that their heart wouldn't go out to them for the dream of a better life.
Yeah.
But in today's world, how do we get those stories heard?
Everybody has a story. Everybody wants to live in a contrary to what's going on in America today, in a safe, feel environment. They want to have a job. They want to have a life that's peaceful. And a lot of parts of the world isn't that way. It hasn't been for eons of time. And so you're always going to have that influx of people migrating from one area to another, trying to find that place, that magical place, whatever that may be. That's how America got founded, right? A lot of immigrants came to come. Why? Because they're better life, freedom, and somewhat safety at that time. And I think today, it's no different. There's people that want to come to this country. Yes, it's unfortunate the way they have to do it, but I don't know. I don't have the answer, folks. We were just a very blessed family, my dad, and he was just smart enough to just work real hard at finding somebody willing to take a chance with us. Yeah.
So, Gerard, did you went through college on GI Bill?
Yeah.
And you graduated with a degree in
Architecture.
and so
My father wanted to be an engineer because his mother died when he was 12. Penicillin was just coming around and they couldn't get the penicillin to her. And my father's very smart. If he had a natural upbringing, I think my father would have been a medical doctor of some sort. He had the gift of his long fingers. He was very skilled. He's very brilliant, could speak 5 languages. Yeah, I can barely speak English. So, yeah.
So is that how many years have you been working?
Since Dale Tucker invited me innocently to do a porch in 1997, I believe.
And how many houses have you built?
I think we're going to finish, Tom and a few other people, I think our 41st house. Yeah. There's a lot of families in there that deserve a chance. And the people, the Ward family and the Baptist Church gave us that chance. And I don't want to say I want to move it forward, but in some sense, that's my makeup in some way.
yeah. So how much of the Habitat house now is being subbed out?
We're one of the very few teams that does everything except the concrete work, the plumbing, and the electrical, and the HVA.
But other teams are subbing more than that.
Well,
Drywall.
the drywall, yeah, because it's very difficult to have folks like that willing to do that work, for one, and it's a commitment to some degree. Well, big commitment, but it takes skill level, and when you do it with a lot of volunteers, you have an issue with that. Okay, I think Ellen told me 11 o'clock, and I'm past it. Thank you very much, and I appreciate it. Thank you.